Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third conference of the Human Territory and Society by the French Institute of Indonesia, or IFI. First of all, I would like to thank EVO for the organization of the event, and then I would like to thank Komunitas Historia Indonesia for helping us with the communication, and last but not least, IRD with the technical assistance, the camera and all, and the speaker as well. So now I would like to briefly introduce Pak Jérôme Tadié. So Pak Jérôme is an urban social geographist, if I'm not mistaken, in the IRD, the French Institute of Development. He is the author of Les Territoires de la Violence à Jakarta, or Territories of Violence in Jakarta, and his research domain,
diterjemahkan dalam bahasa Indonesia, wilayah kekerasan di Jakarta.
Wilayah kekerasan di Jakarta, in Indonesia. And his research domain is mainly Jakarta on night and environmental side of Jakarta. What is environmental side of Jakarta? We'll ask Pak Jérôme later. So without further ado, I'll present you Pak Jérôme Tadié. Give her the applause.
Thank you very much. Jadi terlebih dahulu saya ingin berterima kasih pada IFI dan Nicolas Gascoigne dan Alice Maestracci serta FEO untuk undangan ini dan kesempatan membawa lecture ini. So don't worry, I'll be speaking in English afterwards. Saya juga ingin berterima kasih pada Ibu Risa Permanadeli yang hadir di sini. Dengan siapa saya melakukan penelitian ini dalam program Trouble. Sekarang saya akan pakai bahasa Prancis, itu artinya Transformasi urbaine, oubli et espace à Jakarta. Jadi transformasi perkotaan, rasa lupa dan ruang di Jakarta. Now in English. So yes, I would still like to thank IFI for the invitation, as well as FEO for inviting me and to give me the pleasure to present some results of this research, as well as Risa Permanadeli from the Center of Research for Representation Studies here in Jakarta, with whom I have been conducting this research. So yes, I will start, and I would just like to say that afterwards the questions, if you have any, I hope you will have some, you can ask them in French, English or Indonesian. I think we will deal with the three languages. So as Vito said, I've been doing research in geography for quite a while in Jakarta, and even in Jogja. That was my first field work in the 90s for my master's. And I have always been dealing with how the city is managed, organized and constructed in more or less official ways, actually less. So it's what I'm studying is the role of informal processes in the ways Jakarta is managed on a day-to-day basis. So during these researches, I had several topics of research. I had several encounters with ghosts. First in Jogja, there were several ghost stories from the family with whom I was living back in the 90s. And then also when I was doing research for my PhD in Tanah Tinggi near Senin, one morning actually, I remember I was staying in a cos, so my room didn't have a window, but I had two neighbors who had a window giving on a small courtyard where there was a tree. And so one of the neighbors just told me that the night before he had seen from the tree a woman coming down, looking at him, and then floating and going towards the house, And then the other neighbor, the other Nakos, who was staying in the other room, who had a window, told me how he was woken up by a woman that same night. So that was one of my first close encounters, with ghosts. So that's just one of many examples of the stories encountered in everyday life in Jakarta, for the delight and also the fear of those who tell and hear them. So I decided, and discussing with Risa too, we decided to take ghosts seriously and to deal with them as a topic of research. So why Jakarta first, and why ghosts in Jakarta? First of all, it's an interesting city. It's the biggest city in Indonesia, and I quite like it. It's also the symbol of Indonesian modernity, and it's a setting which is far from the remote areas, villages, forests, or remote times, like in the Ramayana, for instance, where usually ghost stories are officially located. So it's a setting which is far from the exotic side in which usually ghost stories are placed. Here, ghosts in Jakarta and Indonesia are taken into account seriously. Most of the people actually, whether they confess it or not, have had direct or indirect encounters with them, and so they are part of the society and the city. So, how can we define ghosts? A first common definition could be the images of the dead that appear in a supernatural way. So hence the reappearing dead or the reappearing deceased that we have in the title. In Java, Goethe, the anthropologist, in his book The Religion of Java, distinguishes three types of spirits. We'll see that the differences between ghosts and spirits aren't always as clear as it seems. So these three types of spirits he distinguishes in Java, but actually which are also found with different names all over the archipelago, are first the frighteners, the memedi, who might be male, such as the Gundrowo, which is a giant who can be playful, who can take the appearance of known people, the husband for instance, and who can thus who can play jokes on people. They can also be female, such as the Sundar Bolong, the Kuntilanak, or the Wewe. Some with beautiful women, beautiful or not, depends on the accounts, with a hole in the back. So, second type of spirits are what Goethe calls the ethereal ones, the ethereal spirits, the Lumbut, who can possess, make ill, or drive people crazy. Finally, the third type of spirit he distinguishes are the spirit children, the Tuyul, who indeed look like children, and they can be acquired to make someone rich. So out of these three categories, the one that looks more like the ghost, the Hantu, is in the first one, the Memedi. So in this presentation, I would like to question how these beings, this makhluk, we would say in Indonesian, who are part of the representations and the imaginaries of a society, here Jakarta, not only reflect its evolution and characteristics, but are also part of the representations that the inhabitants have of their everyday environment, of their surrounding environment. So I would like to see how such representations interact with the perceptions of space and the transformations of the Jakarta, such as the succession of inhabitants. We will see former inhabitants are still there, and also the changes in city users and land users. So why is this interesting? Because in studying the evolution of the city, what is important is not only how a city is conceived and changed by its leaders, by its developers in a physical way that you can see, for instance, even outside of the IFI, but also how such changes are seen and lived by its inhabitants. This is important, not only in the case of ghosts, but also, for instance, in the case of international policies which are exported, or international models, urban models, which are exported from one country to another. And in every country, they are developed in a different way. And they are always different from place to place. So here we will study ordinary representations of these reappearing dead. And even if the limits between ghosts and spirits, as we will see, are often blurred, we chose here to study the reappearing dead, those ghosts, the deceased, who often endured brutal death. Brutal death, I think an Indonesian would say, kematian yang kurang sempurna. So why? First, they reflect past lives. They are also not directly linked to religion. They are part of everyday life, but they do not always refer to the divine or to God. Although in some interpretations of the ghost, some people tend to establish that link, but it's not obvious. So they are in close relationship with the physical world, and that we may see through the ghost stories, and which are my main material. Ghost stories that people have told me through interviews, informal conversations. I also chose, as you will see, to focus on a special neighborhood, the Tanaktingi neighborhood. First, because that was where I knew most people, and so I was most likely to have ghost stories. Especially when people seeing a Westerner don't always want to tell those stories. By fear, I wouldn't take them seriously. So ghosts are liminal creatures. They can be defined also as creatures of transition. They link the visible with the invisible, life with death, and different types of spaces and different types of times, as we'll see. They are paradoxically anchored, as they usually appear in one place. May that place be moving, like a car sometimes, or not, a house for instance. They are at the same time strangers and but also familiar creatures. They are present without being part of the community. So here we will show how the deceased, who appear and take the role of markers, traces, not only point to the memory and heritage of the city by making them present again, but give a meaning and a depth to the places beyond the visible. Since thus the relationships of the Jakartas with their material and immaterial environment that we will study. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any pictures. And here I said that I wanted to go far from the exoticism of the representations of ghosts, but I have chosen a photo which is the most exotic photo ever, because it's a cemetery. I don't know if some of you know it. It's at Jérôme. So, as a Frenchman, I will organize my talk, my lecture in three parts. That's what we usually do. The first part, we will see what kind of places the ghosts appear, in a part which is called Territories of Ghosts. Then we will see what kind of conceptions of nature in the city they involve, before dealing with a question of ghosts and change. What do ghosts change? What do they tell us about the changes in society? So the territories of ghosts. Usually ghosts, traditionally, can be found in different types of places that are believed to be inhabited both by ghosts and spirits, actually. So these are humid places, bamboo forests, although there are little in Jakarta, but there are still some parks left, big trees, like banyan trees, uninhabited houses, which are often left dark, and uninhabited plots of lands, but also at some points, like for instance after the 1998 crisis, abandoned projects. So here we have a first kind of repertoire, a guide to haunted places. I use haunted, but actually the correct term would be the Indonesian one, angker. So angker could be, if you look at the dictionary, I guess would be translated as spooky, but spooky is a bit bizarre. It's more or less a place that provokes a strange feeling where one cannot do whatever he wants, where one has to behave because it is inhabited, because there is a presence. And I thank Risa for this definition. So to these first types of common places correspond other types in Jakarta, such as the ones that can be seen on the social networks. And for that I did a map, so I don't know how this works, we'll try it. So this is representation, a common representation of ghosts in Jakarta, famous haunted places in Jakarta. As you actually can't read, it's written in really small at the bottom. It comes from websites. So those websites are 10 tempat paling angker di Jakarta, 14 tempat paling angker se Jakarta, 7 tempat paling angker se Jakarta, dan that kind of places. So here we can see there are both, I don't know if you can read it well, it kind of moves, but yeah. And I'm sorry, there's one I left in French. I tried to translate everything, but I forgot the Casablanca tunnel, which is Tunnel de Casablanca, Casablanca. So first, there are the cemeteries. There's one, Jérôme, which is well known for its priest without a head. Then there are roads, infrastructure, tunnels, railways, rail crossings where accidents took place. You've got Bintaro, that you can see where in October '87 there were 2 trains that collided, making 156 dead. You've also got the Manggarai depot, where the carriages, the wagons were brought after there, so it's also believed to have ghosts there. You've got the Casablanca tunnel, which is actually in the middle of former cemeteries, and then on one side there is also a cemetery, but there's also people who committed suicide there. Then you've got parks such as Taman Langsat near Barito, and you've got houses. Prapancha, Dharma Wangsa, actually I did a mistake, it's Prapancha, Dharma Wangsa are the same, it's a potato house where baby died, an empty house in Pondok Indah too, and then I forgot, there was also Rumah Sakit Cipto Mangunkusumo, because the morgue is there, and then you have places linked to the political history of Jakarta. So the first one is Ancol, with Simanis Jembatan Ancol, which is a story linked to the colonial history of a girl who didn't want to marry a Dutch guy. Then you have the Lubang Buaya, where the generals were dumped in October 1st, October 1st, 1965. Then you have the Klender shopping mall, it was called Jogja, I think, where you have more than 500 people who died in the May 1998 riots. So these places are kind of caricatural, actually, and they all turned out to be famous, as all of them, yes, the last was Langsat, have a film made out of the story. So here we have, and we'll discuss the films a bit later in the talk. So to go beyond this first caricatural aspects, as seen on this map, I tried to study the ghosts at a local scale, or to see other types of apparitions that can be seen. Yes, the history of the project, at the beginning I thought, as a geographer, it would be a really interesting subject, because you had ghosts in some places, such as here, so it would be interesting to see how people act in those places and study those kinds of places. But it didn't take me 3 days to realize that ghosts were everywhere, so that couldn't be done. So that's why I changed scales and started trying to map some ghost stories that were told to me in the northern part of Tanah Tinggi, where I have met some apparitions. So I don't know if you know the place. It's just by Jalan Suprapto. You've got the Rusun there. You've got some excellent Betawi soup also over there. So Tanah Tinggi, as many neighborhoods in Jakarta, is dense and has undergone much reorganization. That's what you can see with the social housing, also with the infrastructure which has changed, changes of land uses too, and so on. So here I tried to map some of those apparitions. So as you can see at the corner of Tanah Tinggi, I forgot, it's Empat, I think, and Suprapto, you've got a gas station, which was built around 2007, and there is, it's the small building to the right. It's a small service building where you have an ATM and where people rest who work there. On the ground floor, a child was seen by several people who work there, and on the first floor I had stories, accounts of a beautiful, that's what people say, woman who looks Chinese. And of course these two appearances are immediately linked in the accounts to the former dwellers of the neighborhood. No, I won't show with the red light because sometimes I shiver, so you will see it. And so yeah, this is the north part of the neighborhood, is of Indonesian Chinese origin. So next to the avenue where you have the red light, former crossroad is written in the legend, other accounts of people seeing a giant there, which reminds of the Javanese Gandrowo, and he is explained by the accident that took place when there was still a crossroad and people were crossing. Now it has been changed and you've got a U-turn and you've got to go much farther and then you can't cross anymore there. So here I will, as I hadn't got many pictures to show you, I've got some extracts of my field notes to read to you. So here's a rather long extract. So Lukman asked me if he'd already told me the story of the creature, the kuntilanak, who broke his wrists. He goes to pray first and then tells me. It happened during the clearance and building of the gas station around 2007. On that plot of land, after compensating the inhabitants, the houses started to be destroyed. I had bought the rights to collect the materials of one of the biggest houses. As it was a Chinese house, I thought there would be antiques and worthy materials in it. I enter the house, nothing in it. I see a locked storage gudang at the rear. I break the padlock. I open the door. There I see, with my eyes, I'm not just feeling, I see a white lady, like a grandmother. I block the door. She still passes, moving sideways. I feel a chill, merinding, and I follow her. She goes to the rear, passes a locked door. I hurry to open it, and there I find a well, sumur. When the story he tells, when telling the story, he tells me he has the chills, merinding, me too. And he continues. At the well, I start reciting Fatihas. Then I ask the ghost the authorization to take the materials. I work at it with my friends during 3-4 days. One day, one of them doesn't come, and there is still the canopy to be removed. 8-10 corrugated foils. I go up to take them. I remove 2. At the third, I hear a big crack under my feet, as if the wood on which I was standing was breaking. I found myself thrown on the floor 3 meters beneath, my hands first and my head. I faint. I had been literally thrown down and nothing had been broken on the structure. My friends bring me home. Then comes an ustad from the mosque and a blind masseur. They tell me the old lady was on me, Nempel. The ustad had seen her. When the masseur was massaging me, it was hard, as if there was a struggle. So that's one of the accounts. So here, what's interesting is that we have, of course, a story of a destruction, of a restructure, of a reorganization of that part of the neighborhood. But the deceased here that is seen, that appears, gives another dimension to this common story. She acts as a marker, a witness, and an actor too, of the history and the evolution of that plot, of that piece of land. Here, even an abandoned space can be occupied and inhabited. Moreover, she impersonates the resistance of the house and the land, the resistance to change, and gives, paradoxically, more materiality to urban change, which recalls also resistance that can be found when wanting, for instance, to fell, to cut certain trees without taking, certain trees like banyans, for instance, without taking the necessary precautions. I think there was a story when about famous banyan when building Taman Mini that was difficult to fell. Here she does, the deceased woman does not only appear, but also has an action on the physical world. So what are the reasons for her presence that are usually invoked? They can be attached to a place. The question is, have those deceased understood that they were dead? They can protect the place, and also it can be a resistance to an intrusion of their territory. So this story also shows different types of interaction between the living and the dead. The living, as we can see, and in the other story we'll see other instances, other examples, perceive as deceased, as dead, using different senses. Some people can see, not all. Some people can hear. Some people can feel. That's where the chills, the feeling of cold. Some people can smell. I had a story of that. And all this relates to the fact that the place is inhabited, is anchor. According to that, the living, as they would with other living people, ask the permission, permissi, to the dead to interact with their territory. So here we can see that all the dwellers, the people who inhabit the places, living or dead, are taken into account through different types of modes, through permission, asking permission, through prayer, even before telling the story. Lukman, of course it isn't his real name, goes to pray before telling the story, and during the demolition too. And we can see that if they cannot deal with those deceased on their own, they address help from other people, from dukuns, for instance, or religious people, to neutralize, displace, or remove those unwanted, sometimes, ghosts and spirits. So on the map, so that's for the gas station. So on the map, there are other places that we can see. So you've got the category empty land or house. So there's one at the Virage. I only missed the English word at the turn. There was an empty house at the Bunderan, at the main crossroad at the center. I'll try this. Oh no. Okay, I found how to do the first, but I don't know how to put the map on again. Could somebody... Gonna try them all? Yeah. So here you have one, here you have one, here you have one, here two. So here's one type of lady seen in empty land or houses. That relates to my first story. My first story was actually here. Then you have houses where people committed suicide, such as here. Other than one next to it is a public toilet, public mandi actually, where this used to be, of course it's not anymore, drug consumption area. So you had many people who injected themselves also in the toilet. So it's known to have ghosts because some people have died from overdoses there. And then you've got this political party office that you can see here. I didn't mention the name, but it's called Party, which has several ghost stories. One is a brutal death. It's a man who was there, who had as a hobby, who liked fishing, and he died brutally. I forgot why he died. And during 3 days after his death, people say there was a smell of rotten fish all over the place. At the rear of the building, when you have the actual house, people have heard noises of typewriters, of wheelchairs to apparitions of ladies. But these, as we can see, they are linked to the history of the building, but they're linked to also the humidity that is in this land. That's why I mapped the rear as nature, humidity, and that kind of stuff. And then there's, to the north of the south, there were some illegal abortion clinics. And here you also have stories of women seen in trees. A Bahaji told me how he felt a creature sticking to his back before fleeing to a tree, and so on. And then you had the social housing that also built in '93, where several ghosts were seen, and which also used to be a place of drug consumption. And with this example, I'll be moving to the second part of my presentation on nature and the city, and with another extract of field notes. So a woman tells me, it didn't happen once, but 3 times. The first, I felt like something obstructing my throat, and I started to laugh in a hysterical way. My husband told me to recite an istighfar. I recite it and feel something that goes out of my throat. The second time was a morning. My husband had left as usual to work in Bekasi really early. I had gone to sleep again. Then, around 8 or 9 o'clock, I'm waken up by the presence of my husband sitting next to me on the side of the bed. I run away and call my husband with my phone. He's in Bekasi. So then I ask if it's in Genro. I'm told it is. Then she continues. The third time, my husband was sleeping. I see an old woman sitting on the floor against the wall, with her white hair tied back. I go to touch her shoulder, and she disappears. I scream, and my husband wakes up. I also saw several times an old woman sitting in the kitchen, in the corner, near the window. Then the discussion continues on the causes. In the corridor, drug addicts used to inject themselves for a long time before we moved in. But I'm convinced it all comes from the big tree outside. She lives on the 2nd or 3rd floor, and there's a big tree coming up to the top. We like to sleep in the dark with the window open, to have some air. That's maybe why there were ghosts. And so they tell me they put some lights to prevent them from entering. The husband, who says he doesn't believe in ghosts, wonder if it's not just all dreams. In the family, it's the women who can see, the daughter, the mother, and also her sister. Men can't. Then the husband says that one has to say prayers often, zikir, in order not to have an empty head. So here, in this extract, what can we see? We can see the territoriality of apparitions. They're located in a place. We can also see who can see ghosts, not everybody. We can also see general attitudes towards ghosts, with a husband who first says he doesn't believe, but still gives advice on how not to be possessed, not to be empty-headed. And then explanations of such appearances. So we have here the presence of nature in the city, which is acknowledged. We've already seen here it's an ejection place, but the tree is regarded as a reason. In the previous account, it was the historical presence of Indonesian Chinese that were there, but there's also a well that the person sees. For the political party, we can see the history of the building, but humidity. For the abortion clinics, we also see the presence of trees. So each time we see how nature and the past are invoked. So those explanations are not always contradictory, and there doesn't seem usually to be a unique interpretation. And that's why here often you find nature besides brutal death and that kind of stuff. It's also mapped here. And for that I also had another story, but in a different neighborhood, in Glodok, in the Dharmabhakti temple, where I was with someone who could see, a clairvoyant. And then he tells me in the courtyard, and that will be my last story because I have to go fast. So the person tells me, there is a woman. She is really skinny, a great poverty. She's a beggar. She's in the tree in the courtyard of the temple. She wears ragged clothing. I can't distinguish when she was living. So I ask him, why is she in the tree? At first there's no answer. Then when we leave, the answer comes. She stays in the tree because all her life she was taught that the sacred was there, in a tree, in incense, or in the sacred space of a temple. So this extract also shows this, it's interesting because it shows the continuities between the world of the living and the European dead, where ghosts are in a sort of intermediary world, but also the overlapping between cultural and natural explanations. Here we can see the importance of cultural representations of nature and trees. So even with the urbanization, cultural representations of space of enough natural elements remain. These overlapping and blurred boundaries and explanations concern also the limits between ghosts and spirits. They are also blurred. Actually, in theory, ghosts should relate to brutal death that are not taken care of afterwards, and spirits more to natural elements. But here we see it's not always the case. These limits are not that simple. As some put it, some spirits can take possession of empty or weak beings, not only amongst the living, that's what the husband was saying in the extract, but also amongst the dead. So there's a blurring of those explanations coming from nature and the past, but also between spirits and ghosts. To paraphrase a sentence by Gates in the religion of Java, we could say that as culture progresses, the influence of ghosts and spirits shrinks as one is less and less empty. So here we have double interpretations where both elements are valid. They show a vision of the world, of the environment, where even in one of the most dense neighborhoods, in one of the most modern cities, metropoles in the region, nature still keeps its role as an organizing element. So I try to be quick with the third part. What do ghosts change? What do they tell about Indonesian society? So it's a curious question, as ghosts seem to be timeless, anchored, and seem not to change. So the question is, what do they show, what do they point to in nowadays Jakarta? So as we have seen in the first map, for instance, they can be not only witnesses of accidents, but also political events. And the first map is interesting because it showed some political events, but it showed also selective memory in those political events, for instance, from 1965 events. To address this question about this evolution, I chose just some material. I chose the Indonesian cinema and tried to see the evolution of the films. So I did kind of database of more than 100 films. But then, those horror, fantastic and mystical films can be dated back to the 30s with two films. In 1934, there was O Pechoa, Dua Siluman Orang Putih dan Hitam. It's a spirit of a white snake that takes the shape of a woman. Then you have also Bujukan Iblis, the flattering of the devil. Then in 1941 you have the most famous first, actually it seems not, horror film, which is Tengkorak Hidup, the living skull. And until the 60s, ghosts and spirits mostly appear in historical stories located in ancient kingdoms or in stories from the Ramayana. Sometimes, like in Tengkorak Hidup, they come from an ancient kingdom to nowadays. It's more in the 70s and the 80s that the ghosts appear as a genre in the Indonesian cinema, with films about the dead, of course, with films inspired by the West. There was a Dracula in '74 and a remake of The Exorcist the same year, and in erotic films too. For example, Pembalasan Ratu Laut Selatan with Barbara and Constable in the 80s, which is called in English Lady Terminator. And it's been censored immediately. In 1994, when it was released again in Indonesia, it was originally 102 minutes, and when it was released, it was only 80 minutes. And in the States, where it became a kind of famous film for amateurs, they had a slogan for it, which was "First she mates, then she terminates." So it's a popular genre with original links with religion. So whereas until the 70s it was usually the dukun who took care of the ghosts, the healer, the wise man, who neutralized them, in the 80s we start to see religious person, whether they be imams, pastor, priests, etc. So we can see how little by little they have been incorporated again in usual religious practice, in the cinema as well as in everyday life. It's also a time, actually, when the censorship of the New Order started to pay attention to ghosts, for fear that such beliefs, if not well channeled, could interfere with the spiritual development of the Indonesian people. That's why we can see nowadays, to address ghosts, such vocabulary which is religious, such as jinn and setan, that show this appropriation, although Satan in Indonesian does not at all have the same meaning than in English. It's less evil, it seems. So it's in such an evolution, it remains unclear whether it is the religions that have incorporated again such beliefs, kind of modernization of religion, or if it is the ghost that became more modern. And this Bongal, in one of his books, that said that the Glendrowo in the 19th and 20th century was only located in trees, and it's only in the 20th century that it became a nice ghost and that it could be seen elsewhere. But then we can see that ghosts in the films come also back for justice and revenge. They persecute gangsters, the people who killed them, etc. 2-3 films to cite: Mayat Cemburu in '73, there's Sundur Bolong in '81, Talaga Angkar in '84, which show actually two types of ghosts that we also have in stories. Those who act on the environment, like the one who pushed Lukman, and those who, by the simple fact of being there, remind past events and bring them constantly to the present. Political events on the map, for instance. So they stand as markers and not just only traces. They can expose past facts, accidents, or injustice. And in this way, in some cases, they can contest the present order, whether it be political, physical, or urban. So, concluding remarks. So besides saying that there are a lot of free appearing dead in Jakarta, I would like to draw on 3 points. First, we can see here how the evolution of the world of ghosts allows us to analyze the evolution of Jakarta. They seem, and they are actually, still socially useful. They are visible and have a place in society. We can also say, in a way, that they give a voice to invisible processes, to sometimes domination processes, and etc. So they add a dimension to the perception of the environment, which is not only the pleasure of telling ghost stories. So what is important here is not the question about the modernity or not, but how they are important in everyday city life and how they mark the transformation of the city. So then, second point, I would like to say that they also reflect how people cope here with urban change. When places are transformed, not only when one builds condominiums on a cemetery or destroys old houses, there is a memory of the places that remains. Similar, actually, you can compare it to the traumas that had been studied in Vietnam after the war, where ghosts were studied by some anthropologists. Those deceased ensure that there is a continuity and a memory of the city, and they mix the different temporalities. Past is part of the present, and thus creates a depth in urban life. Change, therefore, is not as fast as one would like. The developers, political deciders, etc. Here we have witnesses of situations that are not visible anymore, physically. Finally, ghosts here, by the fact that they are localized in one place, add a new dimension to that place. They act like an eruption, an intrusion of time in a peculiar space that are located. And they change the perception of that space, where past and present are one. It's like a living memory where the past is enacted in the present and is part of the same moment. So here we can see how an apparition in a particular place reveals a memory, a temporality, where past and present are one and are bound. So I hope I didn't take too long. Well, thank you very much.
Oke, perkenalkan diri dulu kali ya. I'll talk in English, I guess. So my name is Maudi from Anthropology, University of Indonesia. First of all, I would like to appreciate your presentation. It's a very interesting one, I guess. And I have just a question about the presentation. So my question is, did the depression and feeling of ghost presence related to the people, religion and ethnicity background? Because I think there could be a connection between people cultural knowledge of perceiving this type of creature and creating particular type of ghost. And also, is it related to how people respond and perceiving their natural surrounding?
Sorry, did you say, did you ask if it was related to religion or if it was related?
The background, their ethnicity background.
Ethnicity.
So, because what I've learned in my major is like people cultural knowledge about what appears to them as visible and invisible is, you know, connected to their cultural knowledge, their cultural repertoire about what's seen and what's unseen for them.
Do you want to answer questions one by one?
No, the two questions first.
Okay, is it clear? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Anis. I want to ask, you said that ghosts can be influenced around their living, but what if the people not believe with that myth, can they influence too? I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay. So first, for the ethnicity, cultural background question. So I would say there's not definite answer to that. There would be 2 or 3 types of answers. So if you look at what Goethe says, as long as culture progresses, spirits have less and less place. Which actually I don't believe is totally true. As we can see in Jakarta, cultural consciousness. I think in Indonesia, all the ethnical groups have ghosts and see ghosts, and we are also in a kind of, in Jakarta especially, in a kind of milieu of social interactions where people always have ghost stories going on. So the feeling of ghosts is there even if you don't want it, I would say. Then whether you start believing or not in it, the question. The importance is that all those stories and all those discourses are there. And then, yeah, I actually started answering your question too, because I think they influence the way the society sees its surrounding, whether you believe it or not. So, coming back to that emptiness feeling, and you have not to have an empty head, not to have to be weak, not to be influenced, so you would have that. If you, I don't know, because for instance, there's all that story about religion and really religious people who wouldn't believe in ghosts and that kind of stuff. But then there are always ways to adapt, and that's in Islam, which is a place for spirits and ghosts. In Catholicism, there are also forms of in Christian, moreover, there's also forms of syncretism. Not speaking of the no, I was going to mention the Holy Spirit, but that's different. So yeah, I think it's mostly disconnected with how cultured or how religious a person is. It's just ghosts. Here why ghosts that important is because they still have a role in everyday life. I don't know if I haven't answered both.
Hello, my name is Vela. I'm from Jakarta Post. My question is, so you said that all inhabitants should be taken into account, living or dead. So how do you suggest us, the living creatures, to treat them in terms of, considering their presence in planning the development of the city? Thank you.
Kalau masuk Quran.
Second question.
Yes, hello, thank you. My name is Andrea. I'm actually going to cheat a little bit here because I have multiple questions for you, sir. The first one that intrigued me was the inclusion of humidity as an indicator of ghostly presence, and I was wondering if you could probably explain that from a anthropological or geographical perspective. My next question is that given you've used cinema as your main starting point to gauge how, the role of ghosts and ghostly presence in culture and in society, I was wondering if you had anything to say about how popular comedy / horror genres are in the last decade, and whether it says anything about, you know, how we perceive ghosts. Are they more like laughable figures now? My next point is more of an observation. When you were explaining your presentation, the term penunggu crossed my mind, which is perhaps a more neutral term to describe both ghosts and or spirits. And I think that term may also illustrate your point about ghost stories being about resistance to change, because saying that a place or an area or a feature of nature has something or a presence that waits upon them or waits upon it, kind of illustrates that, you know, it's supposed to be a place that shouldn't be disturbed in any way. So yeah, those are my 2 questions and my 1 observation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Those really interesting questions. So first of all, of how to treat them in city development, I would say it's not really different from treating the living or even the ancestors, or it's all about treating them with respect in city planning, participation, and that kind of things. Of course, you can also do without them, as has often been done, but actually I have some stories about, for instance, when some of the abandoned projects were started again, of some dukun coming there, and it's all about the story of how you cohabitate with them or not. The humidity, that's a tough question. Actually, the humidity question came mostly from the interviews. So I had once a dukun who gave me one explanation. I don't know how true or how valid or how general it is, but he was telling me that humid places, wells and that kind of places, and also Interacting, which is pretty low regarding its name. He was telling me that you had lots, because there you had some gas that was eaten by the spirits, by what he called setan. So that's an interesting point. I don't know, but in the representations, in the discourses, it happened often. So about cinema. So as I use cinema, but I could have used also the interviews, because it was a way of spanning a long period of time pretty easily. So that's why I use it. And you have specialists of horror movies, and ghost movies, which I am not. I'm not. You've got some. Of course, you've got some films who turn ghosts into laughable figures, but I would say it's not general these times, especially when you switch on your TV and you see all those shows about people going to see ghosts in different places. You've got lots of youngsters who do that on weekends, and when you see them over there, they're not laughing. They take it seriously. So yeah, but no. Then the Punungu, yeah, that's a really good point, because it links both the time aspect, spirits, ghosts, resistance, as you said. So yeah, thank you very much.
Another question? 2 questions? Okay. One from there and one from here.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. I'm very interested on how this goes, the disease that appear in space actually affects the space itself. Because you say that it usually appears in like the humid spaces, and then and abandoned houses, and then some spaces with like big trees. But because I expect that this story already happens, already told by people for a certain time, then does it actually affect how the spaces develop? Is it become more abandoned, or is it actually save the trees, let's say, or is it actually push someone to actually demolish the space? I was really interested in the way on how it affects the space. So thank you very much for it.
Yep. And next question, Jérôme.
Ya, Bapak. Selamat malam. I would ask the question in English. It's a rather personal one, actually. As someone who comes from the West, which in a stereotypical manner is not superficial, I would like to know your personal point of view of ghosts and supernatural beings. Thank you.
What do you mean by superficial?
I was saying that the Western society, when speaking in a stereotypical manner, is not superficial. Most people
don't believe that.
Don't believe it. in my personal point of view.
Okay, so thank you for two good questions. So, how do they affect space? So what I showed you on Ghosts in Space, my first beginning remarks, easier to pronounce. So it was a kind of repertoire, it was a kind of cliché that I was presenting about humidity, trees, but as I tried to show afterwards, it can be absolutely everywhere. But then, how did it affect space? This is really interesting. So we see that they induce a consciousness towards nature, towards the environment, towards the trees, that kind of stuff. But then they can also be used as a reason, for instance, for demolishing heritage. That's the easiest example, for destroying the houses in Kota, because nobody wants to live in them because there are ghosts. One of the houses in Tadié, so in Tadié you've got a really nice neighborhood from the Dutch times, which was for indigenous civil servants. And so you've got some really antique houses, and some of them were just left abandoned because they were believed to have ghosts, and then they were destroyed and replaced by a brand new concrete house. So yeah, they can be used, unfortunately, as a reason to demolish. So my point of view on ghosts, I would tend to say, first, it's not the reason. It's not really important, because I take what comes. For instance, I've been here for quite a while too. It's a hard question to answer. So I would say that I would have a tendency to less consider the ghosts when I'm in Paris, because they have less space, and are given less space. And so then you can ask the question whether it is because people need them less, or that kind of question. Then when I'm in Jakarta, where I consider them a lot.
Last question, maybe? Sure? Okay. I would like to remind you that Pak Jérôme speaks perfectly bahasa Indonesia, so you could ask in bahasa also. So, last question?
And French too.
And French too.
Thank you. My name is Melanie, and I'm from a Facebook group called Lapak Merah, which we discuss a lot about supernatural things. And what interests me the most is actually it's more like a question from the group itself. Why the ghosts in Southeast Asia and the ghosts in Western world is so different? Like in here we have like kuntilanak, genderuwo, so many like begu ganjang, whatever it is, and then it didn't appear in the Western world. And in the Western world they have vampire, or what is the white lady, and the
white lady, Maret, huh?
Yeah, but like other things like what's it called? The one who screamed like banshee, yeah, like banshee, something like that. We don't see in the ruo in the Western, and you don't see layak in the Western, something like that. Thank you.
Bonsoir, moi je fais non, je fais parler en anglais. Donc, vous m'avez dit que... je sais pas comment on dit en français, moi. Like, you have stated that in Indonesia, ghosts and supernatural creatures, they have important roles in society. What is it like in Western world, for instance, Germany or France or England or even the United States? Do they have the same important role, or just people believe in them less and less as the world becomes more modern and more we think about, and we comment on dit, moi je sais pas. Like the world is changing to be more modern. So like in these modern societies, do people believe in ghosts less, or do they have the same role? Thank you.
Okay, so the first question. So you've cited some of the folklore too. Dracula is part of the folklore as seen by films, and I don't know too much about Dracula as it's located in Romania. But what I know is about ghost stories in France, although I know a bit less, but I've heard some. So you've got some common figures. You named the White Lady, you have it. But I would say that when I answer these questions together, actually, I would say that you've got also numerous ghosts, which are less popular because people tend to be kind of skeptic sometimes. But if the usual discourse is about being rational and being skeptic, that doesn't mean that there aren't people believing in ghosts, that there aren't people using other ways to deal with the world, using spirits, using magic, but it's more hidden. You've got some good anthropology books in France about that. And one of the things you can say is all you've got now, and it's more or less incorporated in the New Age movement, which is kind of big and bigger and bigger in France, which incorporates all those parallel views of the world, whether it be in medicine, and going to a kind of clairvoyant, kind of dukun or shaman, all those kinds of people. So I would say that the Western world in appearance is a bit different because of the place given to that, but you also have a substract of ghosts, spirits that were left with the modernization of the country. When I'm speaking of modernization, it comes from the Enlightenment centuries in the 18th century up to now, so it's a whole process. So, but they still are ghost spirits in the Western world that are there. And I'm not sure that nowadays people believe in them less and less. They still have a place. People don't talk too much or don't boast too much about it, but there are still some people. And I'm not sure that in this actual period we're going to a more and more modern world. As we can see, obscurantism progressing. So I'm not sure about that trend, but still, that's a different topic. But still, with all those New Age things, ghosts, and not only New Age, it's a hard question to answer. I don't know if you have some insights of somebody from the Western world. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Jérôme. I would like to remind you that thank you very much for your participation, for your speaks and everything. And I would like to remind you that you could discuss informally with Jérôme outside while enjoying some snacks. And I would like to remind you that to attend the next conference, also interesting, on the 9th of April. Until then, see you. Goodbye.